So just to start, I'm going to read some bios or give some bios for our panelists. Madonna Thunder Hawk is a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and she works for the Lakota People's Law Project as a tribal liaison, building alliances and support for Indian child welfare in South Dakota. She's the co-founder of Women for All Red Nations, as well as the Black Hills Alliance, which prevented corporate uranium mining in the Black Hills and revealed high levels of radiation in the Pine Ridge Reservation's water supply. She's taken part in historic occupations at Alcatraz and Wounded Knee, and spent months camped in Standing Rock to oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline. Chase Iron Eyes, hi Chase. He has a long career fighting for the civil rights of Native Americans, including serving as lead local counsel in the Dakotas for the Lakota People's Law Project. He's the co-founder of the Native news website lastrealindians.com and the 2016 Democratic congressional nominee for North Dakota. He was born on the Standing Rock Nation and was deeply involved against the Dakota Access Pipeline from the very beginning, and today he lives at Pine Ridge. And Tokata Iron Eyes is also a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and she has been active against injustice since she was 9 years old when she testified against a uranium mine in the Black Hills. And she's now a youth leader in the climate movement, a peer of Greta Thunberg, and is involved in various other civil rights struggles, including the Dakota Access Pipeline opposition and organizing around missing and murdered Indigenous women in the US. So again, thank you all so much for being here with us. Just to set the context a little bit, I think this conversation is incredibly urgent and important, and obviously we're going to cover COVID, but I hope that we also get to some better news this week regarding some pipeline, legal victories, and perhaps talk a little bit about over-policing as well. Regarding COVID, I think most people who are watching know that Native American communities have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic. I think a particularly striking number is that in New Mexico, where Native Americans make up roughly 9% of the population, they've accounted for as many as 60% of COVID cases. And the federal government of the United States has been so delinquent in its response that Doctors Without Borders had to send in relief for the Navajo Nation. So that's the context. Obviously, the pandemic is very far from over and there are urgent needs. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can start talking about today. Madonna, maybe we can start with you. I'd love to hear you describe what the last couple of months have been like on the Cheyenne River reservation and what the most urgent needs are today.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
What, yeah, how have the last couple of months been with the pandemic in your area?
Oh, with the pandemic, yeah. Okay. We are fortunate to have a good tribal government. They're very issue oriented. And our focus has been, of course, the struggle against the KXL pipeline as a tribe and a tribal government involved. But when this COVID came, immediately our tribal council got together and they got on the offensive right away and said, look, this can't happen to our people. We don't have that. Our population in relation to the rest of the country is small, and we can't afford a pandemic to come, within our borders. So they had meetings and set up different levels, of readiness, and checkpoints were one of them. And they're health checkpoints, checking people that are going in and out of the reservations and not stopping anybody. There's no shutdown or lockdown. It's monitoring. So that was the main focus of it. But because of the state of South Dakota is an open state, it's a Republican state, and the Governor Noem belongs to the Trump cult. She said, oh, it's an open state, everybody can do what they want. We're not afraid, you don't have to wear masks, a real childish attitude, But luckily we are sovereign people and we closed our borders. And so you have to stop and you know, they ask you, how are you feeling? You know, are you, you have any symptoms? No, no, no. You know, well, they take, you know, all the information so that if something does happen, they can track you. It's simple as that. So, and that's what we're still doing now. But because the state of South Dakota doesn't have any, they're not, you know, they're not, no protections. It's, you know, all around us. So our slowly, our our rates are going up. We went from having you know, 2 months practically, and now we're up to, I believe, 27 today.
Okay.
So because of the holidays, you know, and those kind of things that went on. So we, you know, it's a constant battle for us, but we do have the checkpoints operating, and as community, because that's where I work on community level. And one of the things that we're doing, our grandmother's group, with the help of the Warrior Women Project, warriorwomen.org, they help us raise funding. And what we do is we try to provide food for our checkpoint crew 2 or 3 times a week. And it's all volunteer, of course, but that's the community part of our checkpoints, and we support what our tribal government is doing, and we know the checkpoints are protecting us.
Great. Chase and Tokata, could you tell me a little bit about what's been going on in the Pine Ridge area? How has the virus affected you there, and what has the response from the federal government been like in relationship to what your needs are?
Hi. I'm really happy to be with all of you today. I hope you can hear me well and see me well.
Yeah.
Um, so as far as COVID has been on reservations, I think like as of right now, we can count ourselves pretty lucky just in the fact that the way that we were already living was kind of separated and rural. Um, but at the same time, right, like we live like Madonna was saying, we live in a red state and we live in a state with a lot of people who don't believe um, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who oppose following safety guidelines as far as virus control and everything, and it has been very scary because we have to go into their towns, we have to go into their counties in order to buy adequate groceries most of the time, and in order to get supplies, these are all coming from these main metropolitan areas in South Dakota and in North Dakota, in Indian country. And it has been very stressful and also just frightening because Native communities really, we have a lot to lose. And that's not to say that everyone else doesn't. It's just to say that if the virus were to it has the potential to spread really rapidly in Native communities because of the rates of underlying conditions of our people, because of the amount of elderly people that we have in our communities. It just makes this risk a lot greater. And at the same time, these elders, these carriers of wisdom, their lives are put at risk, and in turn, our cultural ways of life are put at risk. Their stories and songs that they're holding, that if they aren't here to share with us, we will forget. And and like Madonna was saying, these checkpoints have really helped, I think, sort of keep track of what the spread looks like, and how we can best monitor it in order to continue, creating preventable measures that we should take. Um, but also like fundings in our hospitals and stuff were already low, and these are federal organizations, and it's really hard for them to take donations from people who want to help, American people who want to help, and we are not getting the adequate supplies that we need to be able to prepare for this level of pandemic. We've seen what coronavirus can do to Native communities. We've seen it in the Navajo Nation, and it's a frightening reality that we really have to prepare for.
Yeah, thank you for that. Chase, do you have anything to add, or I'm also curious on your take about how the lack of federal funding or the withholding of it affected efforts to react quickly to the pandemic?
Yeah, as you know, we had to sue to get the 8 billion that was promised by the Trump administration, by the federal government. So they're not they're tying our hands behind our backs in a situation where our health has been deliberately degenerated over the last 130 years. So we have all of the heart conditions, the diabetes risks, the every quality of life indicator that you can imagine on a reservation is marks as low or high as that of the third world. Sometimes we refer to ourselves as the fourth world. So in the United States, if the coronavirus is said to have a kill rate of 3%, it's been shown on the Navajo Nation that that kill rate of those elders and those who are subjects of subjugation and whose health is designed to suffer, because these reservations are designed to lead to our extinction. They're designed to lead to our complete absorption into the American body politic. So when we're talking losing 15% of our people, well, those numbers are already more than we can bear. Like Tokata was saying, we lose the knowledge holders, we lose people that we value dearly, that the American society, our financial extractive capital, does not necessarily value. Add to this that our only safety point is these health checkpoints. And we have the inherent right to regulate the traffic that is coming through our homelands, much the same way that we did when President Donald Trump came to our sacred Black Hills unannounced, uninvited, and without so much as a consultation or a seeking of our consent, which is our right according to international law, free, prior, and informed consent. So when our guests are coming through our homelands, we're greeting them with a smile, we're greeting them with safety in our minds, and we greet them with an intent to protect and safeguard everybody on our tribal nations, on our reservations, but also we seek to safeguard the outside population from the rates of coronavirus spread that will be evident on reservations where on the Pine Ridge, some families, some households have 5 families living inside one house. So we don't even have a way to adequately quarantine those who contract the coronavirus. And to that end, that's why we're organizing on the ground to make sure we can do some sort of project that addresses the immediate need to provide PPE. We've already done that. Tokata has done that through one of her celebrity friends, Ezra Miller. And we've also done that through our organization, not only Lakota People's Law Project, but a newly formed, I guess, a nonprofit church. We've formed a nonprofit organization that functions as a church to interface with the tribal governments, because some organizations aren't comfortable donating to tribal governments. So we want to make sure that our people not only have the proper personal protective equipment, hand sanitizer and masks, and we also purchased whatever ventilators we could just to prepare for the worst. But now we're thinking that in order to give people a proper, even our elders, a proper way to isolate themselves, to safeguard themselves in the event that one of those children or one of those adults in those 5 family homes in about 2,000 square feet at the most, homes that are 40 to 50 years dilapidated, we want our elders to be able to quarantine and isolate in dignity. So we're trying to design a tiny house project with all the other local nonprofits and everybody that's working here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, Madonna's on the Cheyenne River Reservation, and Phyllis Young, another cohort of ours, is on the Standing Rock Nation. And we're trying to coordinate this all at the same time that there are literal man camps in our midst in a town called Faith, South Dakota, and another town called Phillips, South Dakota. And these man camps bring rapists, criminals, and thugs right into our daughters' midst. So our daughters and our vulnerable population are forced then to confront or to be confronted by situations where we're so desperate that we will take money wherever it's given to us, and we don't have transportation, so some of our women are hitchhiking. And these rapists, criminals, and thugs in these man camps that are here at the behest of TC Energy or Trans Canada, the owners and operators, potential operators of the Keystone XL pipeline. They're housing more than 600 mobile units, and they've hooked up utilities, water, electric, internet, and they've got an entire area zoned off. So we feel that we are under of international aggression, and we will not stand down, because once we give an inch, the entire American country, the populace, our brothers and sisters who were formerly European indigenous peoples, but now who may think of themselves as quote unquote white, even though the white race or the concept of race was recently developed 600 years ago, a full millennium and a half after Jesus Christ walked this earth, yet we think that he could possibly be white. I say that because in these states, we have 70% of this population who don't believe in science, who might not necessarily be as well read as those who are under the influence of the social, political, cultural, spiritual evolution that is represented by our country, and I believe was dreamed of by our founding fathers. Even though those founding fathers, we've only told the good things about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt, the four faces on Mount Rushmore, on our sacred site known as the Six Grandfathers. That's why if you paid attention to any of the media lately, it only took about 200 of us to go up there and send a very loud, clear message that we want to renegotiate the terms of our peace treaty, because we under the sacred covenant and under our holy sacred calf pipe swore to uphold peace. And we also swore when we became American citizens in 1924, after we had fought in World War I without even so much as a single constitutional or human right recognized by the United States, yet we were still willing to die for those truths that we also hold to be self-evident. So when we're signing up to fight for our military and protect our brothers and sisters, our freedoms here at home, we have a commander-in-chief who is putting us at risk, who is poking fun and ridiculing and mocking a war hero like John McCain, and he's desecrating our sacred lands and the legacies of our forefathers who thought that we could build an American nation for all of us. And we are in the throes of rewriting that social contract. There is no home for racists in this country anymore. And it's a beautiful thing that is happening in this country. We're already in the throes of that evolution. And we are going to recognize each other's humanity as we go forward. But in these states, a lot of these people are hard to work with. They're almost incorrigible, but they're definitely not irredeemable. We have to believe that. I believe that when I ran for the United States Congress, I felt and I knew in my heart that if we were to win that election, I could then express these truths, these indigenous ancient worldviews to a much larger audience. But as it were, I had a snowball's chance in hell, but I still convinced myself that I could win. And I still believe that we could win. And for me, it doesn't matter what color or what label the political party has. If they're honestly and truthfully willing to engage a truth-telling in the first instance, then we can have a conciliation and a reconciliation led by and guided by the original sovereigns and the original civilizations of this hemisphere who recognized a fledgling American sovereign as our younger brothers and sisters. We offered to take them in and provide them. We taught them how to live here. We taught them how to grow food. We taught them how to honor the land. And the land has known these generations for 240 years. So this land loves you, and this land will provide a way of life, but we have to learn to respect each other and respect Mother Earth and create regenerative and different ways of valuing our economy. You just have to take a look around and see that we are headed for the precipice. That financial, extractive, oppressive regime is marching all of us to the edge of a cliff. And the indigenous nations are throwing their stakes in the ground and saying, wait a minute, we want to live a different lifestyle. And we know that the majority of the American people are not racist. The majority of the American people do not want to see us live in squalor and be punished and be subjugated legally, politically, and economically. So it's through these methods and these platforms that we're able to share these concepts, ideas, and truths, and we can create new and better realities just from us talking to each other.
Thank you, Chase. I think that larger point with the underlying issues, that it's not just COVID, but how everything is connected, is so important. And I really appreciate that perspective. And I have lots of follow-up questions, but I do want to bring Daniel Sheehan into the conversation quickly. Daniel is the Lakota People's Law Project Chief Counsel. And so I just quickly am wondering if you could brief us on any ongoing legal issues regarding either the checkpoints or federal aid or anything else that you think is important for people to know about.
Yes, the part of the assistance that we at the Lakota People's Law Office bring to these discussions is to try to prism all of these extraordinarily important issues that Chase and Tokata have raised through the prism of the European law that abides here in the United States. And right now, for example, the challenge that the governor in South Dakota raises to try to insist that she originally insisted she had the right to send state police into the territory of the Great Sioux Nation and force the law enforcement officers of the tribes to take down these safety stations. And when the Native people stood up to her and said they weren't going to do that, she then went to Washington to ask the Trump administration to come in. And what they've done is they're threatening now to take away federal funding for the police departments at Cheyenne River and the Oglala Sioux Nation, and say, oh, since we subjugated you and took your land and promised to give you financial support for your needs in exchange for our taking your land, now they're saying, we're going to use that as a club. We're going to take away the funding for your police departments if you try to set up these safety inspection stations. And so what we need to do is try to stop them from doing that legally. And of course, they also say, we're going to also take the position of ordering pipelines to come through your territory. The Dakota Access Pipeline along the eastern boundary of the Great Sioux Nation, the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline along the western boundaries of the Great Sioux Nation. And no matter what the people say, no matter what the Lakota people say, they don't care. They just insist they're going to cater to the interests of the major oil corporations to continue the kind of rapacious activity of the European culture against the resources of the native people there. And so what the indigenous people have done, led by Chase Iron Eyes and the young people like Tokata, have said, look, that what we want to do is do everything that we can do peacefully, using the laws of the European culture itself here in the United States to protect our people. But we need to make it clear that when those legal provisions that are provided are insufficient, we will in fact mobilize and reach out to the people of the world to support us, like happened with the Dakota Access Pipeline. Chase led the arguments there, saying that the legal system that the Anglo people had to authorize the pipelines were insufficient to protect the people. And Chase led many of the people in insisting that the Native people had a right to mobilize and put themselves in the pathway of the Dakota Access Pipeline to physically stop that pipeline because the legal system wasn't functioning effectively to protect people. And so that what we do is we're with Chase and Tokata and Madonna Thunder Hawk and Phyllis Young and a lot of the other people from the Lakota nations have worked together to try to provide the kind of legal assistance to help the Native people raise up the same rules that the white people say they're going to enforce to protect themselves. And that's the, I'm just here sort of on the sideline to be of assistance in providing that kind of aid to people that who are doing the real fighting here.
Great, thank you. Well, speaking of the pipelines, I would love to hear from Madonna, Chase, and Tokata, whoever wants to speak, or all three of you, about the court ruling on Monday, which ordered the Dakota Access Pipeline to be shut down pending an environmental review. And that was shortly followed by another order effectively halting construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. So first of all, congratulations on those victories for the moment. And I'm interested in what that means to you all personally and practically.
Well, Madonna, Tokata, Chase again.
Madonna, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, like I said, my world is moccasins on the ground. So the communities and the activists that we have, the water protectors we have on our reservation, keep tabs on that, what's going on, what's happening. But also our main focus has been on, like Chase mentioned, the man camps, that the work is going on. They're still, amassing the housing to start, building and setting up these man camps. So that was our focus at the time. So what happened with the court pulling the plug on DAPL and to a certain extent KXL was a total surprise for all of us. We were like, what? First of all, yesterday morning I heard about the pipeline in the southeastern part of the United States. I can't remember the name of it, but I was thinking, oh, that's awesome. That's so wonderful, but of course that doesn't have anything to do with us. We're out here in a different, totally different situation, when it comes to our people and our land. So when the ruling came down for DAPL, I thought, what? This is, right away on Facebook, that's our communication out here is Facebook. The information was just flying, everybody was on it, talking about it. And then right behind it came the ruling on KXL. So that just, it just really helped us, helped with the morale and everything. But we also know it's an intergenerational struggle. We've got three of us right here in a generation. I was there when Chase was born, and now Takotne also. Anyway, the point being is that this is ongoing. So we understand and we celebrate every victory in every battle, but the war continues. We do not support the war, of course, but we support every victory. So we understand that what this federal government can give can also be taken, So, but it's good for morale, and we're in it, for the long haul.
Yeah, that's great. Tokata, do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, so I was 11 years old when I started being vocal about my opposition and my people's opposition of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I was 11. I am now 16 years old, and for a long time, like, I never expected in the first place to have Standing Rock be such a monumental um, sort of platform for Indigenous peoples and Indigenous people's message in mainstream media, for people to finally hear, you know, what's been happening. Who are Native people in the Americas and all across the globe? Who are these people who have been protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity for millennia? Who are the first peoples of the places that we live in? And for me, this really has been such a huge sign that people are becoming more and more receptive to those messages. We know now that we must treat Indigenous peoples as human beings, because Indigenous rights are human rights. No one should have to fight for clean water. And these are all things that, you know, this younger generation of people, this Gen Z, they understand that, they get it. I think, you know, in a lot of ways, it's really a slap a slap to the face of the, you know, Gen X, this generation before the boomer generation. It's like, this is, your actions are unacceptable and they will not be tolerated anymore. You cannot preach something to your kids. You cannot preach kindness and compassion to your kids. You cannot preach empathy and then go into positions of leadership and make decisions and policies that negatively affect people's quality of life. That is not okay, and we will not tolerate it anymore. And so I really like grew up with that movement, and it made me into who I am, and it gave me the purpose that I have today. And it really, it feels good to just know that a movement started by young people, an 11-year-old and her comrades of similar age. That movement was successful, and that pipeline has been shut down. And if anything, it's a huge sign to young people everywhere that what we are doing is working, and we must keep going if we want to see the change happen. If we want change to be enacted by people in power, we need to be vocal about it. And we need to make sure that it happens, because the power belongs in the hands of the people. And it's time that we start speaking up and realizing that we have all of that potential sitting with us. I always thought about, even when I was a kid, people understand what they need. People understand what they want. And all everyone needs is a good push in the right direction to know that they can accomplish that those things are possible. Because why should we have people living without clean water, living without sustainable energy? Why should we have people suffering when we know that the 1%, these billionaires, is these people with gross amounts of wealth, this sort of disparity? We know that the way that they're living, the luxury, the safety, those things are possible for every human being on this earth. And we are tired of being denied those rights. And I just, you know, as far as the man camps and everything, it's really like South Dakota, these states who have decided to ignore the calls of their own citizens for so long, they have another thing coming for them. I think, as we've seen at Mount Rushmore, that front line was entirely held by young Indigenous women and elders. That's all it is. And it's really like telling your children, telling young people everywhere that you believe in them and you believe in their right to tell between right and wrong, and giving them the courage to speak up about the things that they know are negatively impacting the people around them, giving them the courage to be like, you have the power in these situations to enact change. And, you know, and if the people in power aren't accepting that accountability that we are trying to hold them to, then they are not fit to hold their positions any longer. So like Unji Madonna said, you know, it's a really good victory, and we still have a really long way to go. But this is really like the first step. This is a wake-up call to politicians everywhere, that you will be held accountable or you will get lost.
Yeah.
I'll I'll add in. Thank you for that. As far as Standing Rock goes, I think we'll continue to see that Morton County, the state of North Dakota, Governor Jack Dalrymple, Governor Doug Burgum, they still owe us for transfer fees. If they're going to transport these resources and steal these resources from our land, they should at least pay us equitably. And even though, just like the Black Hills money, we're owed $1.3 billion for the taking of the Black Hills, when the Hearst family took $74 billion of gold alone, so we'll never accept that blood money. But with Judge Boasberg, maybe Judge Boasberg has children, maybe he has grandchildren, and maybe he realizes that he and his children and his progeny will also need clean water and a healthy ecosystem if they hope to survive the human-caused climate catastrophe, which causes 100 degrees in the Arctic, which causes Bolsonaro's Brazil to burn up the lungs of the planet so we could eat more beef. We have completely lost our way. And young leaders like Tokata, like her colleague Greta, those types of leaders are sending the world leadership, who have also completely abandoned their posts as leaders, when they're willing to be bought out by any big lobby which will put money in their campaign. And these leaders need to be willing to stand with all of those people, the tens of thousands, the scores of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of people who came to Standing Rock throughout those 16 months, and the billion people worldwide. We are all going to be vindicated together, because what happened there was a political imprisonment of Red Fawn Fellis and the others who are doing our time, just because we are trying to protect not only our treaty, our natural and our human rights, but every American's constitutional rights to peaceably assemble, to freedom of speech, to be free from illegal searches and seizures like the kind that AT&T, Verizon, and the federal government have set up for us right now. So with the Keystone XL pipeline, the man camps, the health and safety checkpoints, our ability to regulate the traffic, it's all connected to our right to sovereignty, our right to have America finally honor its treaties with us. And if you look at Mount Rushmore, you looked at President Trump, he thought he was going to come in here and spread another plague to the indigenous nations, who are the original owners and landlords of this country. And still we have our hands out with forgiveness and compassion, saying to all of the non-Indian settler landowners in Rapid City and in the Black Hills, look, you are safe and secure in your private property and capital interest, because your jurisprudence was designed to protect only those things. So we have to speak a language that those people might understand. We're saying you can keep your private property, just help us get back from the federal government the 1.3 billion or 1.3 million acres that they now control. And the feds are going broke. They're putting our Black Hills up for sale every day. And we don't have the money to buy them back at fair market value. We've already had to buy our stolen land and stolen sacred site known as Peshla back in a campaign that was originated by Tokata's mother, for which I received international credit for. We paid $9 million for 2,000 acres because it was the epicenter of our cosmology and our ceremonial protocols, which happen to this day, still here on this earth, hurling us through space at 67,000 miles per hour. We still conduct these holy covenants so that all life on the planet will once again flourish, that we can recover and redeem our human mistake, whether you call it financial extractive communism or capitalism or any other kind of ism or ology. We as a human family must redeem ourselves.
On the subject of redemption, I'm going to go to audience questions and read one from Charles, which is related to what you were just talking about regarding the Black Hills. And Charles asks, would Madonna, Tokata, and Chase agree that the US government should remove the faces from so-called Mount Rushmore in the least destructive way possible and withdraw ownership claims to the Black Hills as a first step to changing things for the future?
I'll take 30 seconds. I think that we should talk about that as an American family. Of course, it's either that or we have to tell the truth about those men, the truth about every single one of those men. Maybe we should consider putting a woman's face on Mount Rushmore. And maybe we should consider even addressing Crazy Horse Mountain, which is a carving of one of our prophets and leaders. To disturb and deface the natural universe as it was intended to be is a desecration in principle. So we need to have a discussion about who we should be celebrating, because if I'm a European American, my heroes are etched in stone because of the genocide and slavery that was imposed on this country. I can't get away from that legacy. I have to make peace with that. So we can make peace with that by first telling a truth and deciding what we should do about these monuments as a family.
Yeah. Madonna or Takata, do you want to add on that, or should we move to another question?
Yeah. I mean, I actually kind of have a differing opinion. I think at the base level, it's land back. I think that all signs point to land back. You need to return the land to indigenous peoples and let them decide what to do with it. The American government has no jurisdiction, and it has no right to decide what happens to that mountain. It never did, which is why those faces are there in the first place. It is a blatant symbol of white supremacy, um, and the rights to it need to be handed over to the indigenous peoples of that land. Whether or not it's the Oceti Sakowin as a whole or the Oglala who are living nearest to it now, I think that it needs to be handed back to the people who rightfully protect it, and have been seeing it for its holiness since our inception. And really, I think that that's sort of the truth for all of these monuments and these different symbols of colonial violence all across the nation. Let's find out the first peoples of that land and let's ask them what they want to happen, because for too long their voices have been ignored and their rights have been ignored. And this is our opportunity to this is the opportunity for not redemption and not reconciliation, but sort of an acknowledgement of the genocide that has happened and the acts of violence that have happened since, and that the American people have upheld. We are still really, as a people, we have not evolved very much. We are listening and we are following the practices of slave owners. We are practicing we are listening to the values and morals of people who literally said that they owned humans. I think that it needs to be rewritten, and it needs to be our laws and our policies about how we are dealing with these sorts of things need to include indigenous voices and indigenous perspectives, and they need to include young perspectives.
Strike my last testimony.
Madonna, what do you want to say?
To me, this is all deja vu. 50 years ago, we did this at Mount Rushmore. And like I keep reminding people every chance I get, it's an intergenerational struggle. Our issues do not change. Our issues are not new. We are the only people in this land, this country, that are land-based, legally. Everybody else is immigrant. Okay, so what I think as an elder, since when I was young and they arrested us and drug us off and tied us up and drug us off Mount Rushmore, I personally think that that monument has to be left alone. Let it deteriorate on its own. We don't need to desecrate the hills anymore by blowing it up or carving it out or anything else. Because you know what? It's just a layer of plaster to begin with. That's why it's white. You know, it's a facade. And underneath, when that plaster deteriorates and is gone away, then underneath, you know, Mother Earth, nature will take care of the rest. So I agree with Tokata. We need to have it returned to our people. But, you know, 50 years ago, we said the same thing. So maybe in 50 years, who knows, you know, another 50 years. But if and when it returns to our people, incidentally, we have legal standing. It is our land. You know, federal court said so, in case those, you know, that think inherent doesn't mean anything. But anyway, yeah, that's what I really believe, that, you know, it needs to be left alone because it's man-made. It'll deteriorate on its own.
Thank you for that. I'm going to read another question from Ann Martin. She asks, or she says, my experience is that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is like a tribal babysitter. How can we change or eliminate the role of the BIA in overseeing tribal matters so that the autonomy of the tribes can be enhanced?
Let me go for 30 seconds again, I guess. Okay, Tokata mentioned land back, and land back is actually a prophecy of one of our prophets named Fool's Crow. He said, if we return lands to indigenous hands, we can heal the world. And that's because through science and through other knowledge systems, people are now finding out that we know a lot more than what the school books say that we know. And when we are the original protectors of the land, and we actually manage the land to create healthy and abundant ecosystems. The BIA and the status in which Indian land is held is a fiction of the European jurisprudential imagination. So the Indian land title needs to be amended, and we need a Congress that is informed. We need a president that is willing to work with indigenous nations, not trample on their rights, and continue to execute the boot on our neck that we live with every day. We are literally surviving a genocide, an active genocide. You call it a legal, political, economic subjugation, but you would have to spend any amount of time on any of these reservations to understand the daily struggles that we face just to stay alive, just to create a will to struggle through these oppressive mechanisms. And we, by the grace of creation and the powers that be, we are still here and thriving and are continuing to reshape the realities of this entire globe.
Madonna, do you have anything to share about the BIA and your perspective of what should happen with that agency?
Well, you know, in details and all of that, that's beyond me. But on the ground again, and with working, you know, living and working all these years on the res, you know, here at home, in reality, we are colonized people. That's, when I say moccasins on the ground, that's the level of the majority of our people. That's how our people think in most terms. So anytime it's taken all this few generations now since the late 1800s, before the Bureau of Indian Affairs was formed, but the mind, you know, brainwash that took place of our people, colonized thinking, you know, it's going to take that amount of time to bring our people out of that. Okay, so in fact, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is slowly, because of the different politics in Washington, is slowly easing out anyway. And to me, that's a good thing, because when all growing up years, I remember the Bureau of Indian Affairs were the biggest offices on the reservation, the biggest ones, at all the offices and all the buildings. And now it's the other way around. You know, they're over here kind of, you know, they're still there in major areas, you know, to keep us colonized, but the tribal governments have, expanded. And a lot of that is, of course, the federal funding outside of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So it's slowly coming about, the more our tribal councils and our people become more modern in modern day thinking and understanding what colonialism means and, the mindset and that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's in the process now, and with the younger generation coming up that are gonna, no holds barred there, they're gonna kick them off the door probably, but that's how I see it.
Thank you. We only have time for a couple other questions, so I want to return briefly.
Can I say something
Oh, yes.
really quick? I just wanted to say that first of all, ACAB, like the BIA are still just cops, and the entire police state needs to be dismantled. Police do not protect us, and they are not protecting Black or indigenous communities in any sense. All people of color have been violently impacted by police, and they need to be abolished. Also, tribal governments and the BIA are complete replicas of the broken US governmental systems, and indigenous people cannot gain indigenous sovereignty by using the systems of their oppressors. It genuinely, those systems were set up on these lands and in our communities specifically to oppress us, specifically to integrate us into this capitalist greed-filled society. And if we wanted to, in indigenous peoples and people of color everywhere, I think in a lot of ways have not adapted to capitalism the way that we were intended to, because we are not exploitive people. That is not the way that humans work. And in a lot of ways, I think that, it really takes our communities, indigenous communities, we really have to start asking these really hard questions. Like, how are these systems specifically serving us? Have they done any good for us in the past generations? Are they helping us or are they hurting us? And if we come to the conclusion, when we come to the conclusion that these systems are harmful, and we must take accountability and responsibility to disband those systems, because our children deserve to live as autonomous nations. Our children deserve indigenous sovereignty. They deserve land back, and we are going to get it. I no longer think it's a question of when. It's a question of what are we willing to do right now that ensures the change that we need to see happening.
Thank you. Those are excellent points, and I really appreciate the connection to the police brutality discussion that's happening. Quickly going back to some questions about COVID, and then we'll have one more and wrap up. So Jennifer Knickerbocker asked, what are your thoughts about the lack of data being collected? About the rates of disease among Native Americans? Why are we being left out of the data being collected? And I would just add to that, there was another question about potential aid from FEMA to provide housing to help create opportunities for quarantine. So I'm curious if, on both of those points, if any of the panelists have thoughts. And if not, that's okay. We can move on to another question, but either on data collection and or
Look,
other.
I don't like to be the first guy to speak, but if none of these the two women who have a right to speak before me are gonna cut in front of me, then I'm the 32nd man here. So look at the tribal governments aren't even privy to the actual COVID data that is affecting our daily lives. We have to wait for the 3 counties on Pine Ridge, for instance, and the Indian Health Service, which is an arm of the federal government. Even though my wife is Pine Ridge's Dr. Fossey, they cannot tell the tribal governments the actual number of COVID cases that are here, though right now we know we have about 100. And we don't hear our president talking about actual data. He's talking about distractions. And so with data-driven and science-based solutions, which we're trying to follow, and which we're trying to get the entire American public to follow, social distancing, wearing face masks, not seeing that as an encroachment upon what Americans think they have a freedom, a constitutional right to the freedom of choice, which does not exist. So what we're saying is that much like requiring people to wear seatbelts or to have car insurance, we need to enforce social distancing and those other protective measures and create data-driven solutions. So we're not there yet. And nobody's talking about, except maybe Robert Reich on Twitter, that the Indian country is dying at 5 times the rates, the kill rates that American citizens are dying from COVID right now. And we have a government that isn't, I should say a president that's not willing to address those hard truths.
That is certainly true. Madonna or Tokata, do you want to add on that?
I just have one comment is for my reservation, Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. Like I said, they're proactive, since March, since the end of March, and basically knew that there wasn't going to be any help, there wasn't going to be anything going on anywhere, so they had to do it ourselves. So we have 4 levels of preparedness and of what's happening. We've gone through all levels now. We're at level 4 because our numbers are going up slowly, but we went from 8 last week, 2 days ago, to 27. So that's very, very scary for us because we've held it down all this time to 2, but because the state is wide open, we're surrounded. So the statistics and all that, our tribal government has all of that in place. It's been set up. They meet every morning and they discuss all this because we know we can't depend on anyone outside of our reservation borders for stats or anything. We have to do it ourselves, and that's what we're doing.
Tokata?
The only thing that I'll add is that we know that disparity and that the tragic lack of data happening in Native communities is completely intentional, and it's deliberately and very blatantly a continuance of genocide. You are cutting off access to resources to a people who already had, who were already at a disadvantage when looking at the COVID crisis, when looking at the sort of all of the broader crises that Indigenous people were dealing with before the global pandemic, and the fact that the data that this isn't changing, and we've seen this through the voting crises and different things. Data is not being taken effectively in Native communities, and it's causing tremendous problems and tremendous misinformation to the mainstream population about what access looks like to resources on Native communities and how they can help. Because how are we supposed to adequately address a problem if no one's telling everyone, if no one's giving accurate information about what that problem looks like?
Yeah,
it's deliberate and it's fully intentional.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. We are about out of time. I have one more audience question, and that comes from Charles and many other people who've been asking. For those of us who would like to help in at least some small way, wishing that it could be more, what would be a good organization for donations? Or if you have other ways to be involved.
Well, I would say, 2 of us are affiliated with Lakota People's Law Project. We don't have a name for our church yet. There's also a man who is at risk of serving political imprisonment. His name is Nick Tilson. He was charged with felonies as a result of the Mount Rushmore protests. I would also say that we are trying to create sustainable economic empowerment. That's what the Tiny Homes Project is about. That's what the legalization of hemp and cannabis is about on Pine Ridge, though the state of South Dakota charged the last guys who tried to grow cannabis, a plant medicine, charged them with felonies. So I would say that we are all looking for ways to economically provide for ourselves. we're trying to create opportunity, but that subjugation is very real.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Madonna.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there are basically three organizations that we work with effectively. Again, moccasins on the ground. And the first one I would say would be the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe does have a donation page on their page on the internet. So you could go to that Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. But also, of course, the Lakota People's Law Project. And we call it LPLP. They've been on the ground now as long as I've been involved, you know, a good 20 years or so, you know, and well-versed in what's going on, issue-oriented, always have our back on many issues, child welfare, environment, you name it, and especially the pipeline fight. And then, of course, the Women of All Red Nations.org. They really help on basic on-the-ground work, you know, grassroots work. Like I said, you know, helping to feed the checkpoint, you know, crew. That's just one thing, you know, they helped with the masks in the beginning, and we had a massive, because we, again, the tribe, you know, Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, we were on in nobody's priority list for anything, let alone masks, you know, so those kinds of things that these different organizations we've been affiliated with have actually helped and not created a bureaucracy in itself. So those three, I think, are very important work. Thank you.
That's really helpful information. Thank you. Tokata, any other ways that people can help or be engaged right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, my dad and Madonna have sort of touched on the organizations that are really helping right now. I think as far as like personal actions that you can take, it is really going to be like a lot of self-reflecting and it's asking yourself and the people around you how you are perpetuating this sort of systemic issues that are affecting Indigenous communities negatively, right? How are we perpetuating stereotypes? How are we perpetuating stigma in our everyday lives that we have the full ability and capability to dismantle? Because it starts in your homes and it starts in yourselves. You really have to start asking the question, how can I commit myself to creating a better future for my kids, no matter what color they are, no matter where they are coming from? We need to be thinking about the future generations, and that starts with conversation. How can we start talking to one another again? And if you have questions, actively seeking out answers from people on the ground, from frontline communities, asking them what they need, and you know, actively doing everything that you can without exerting yourself or putting yourself at risk to violence, right? How can we stand with our by POC? How can we stand with the marginalized communities? How can we stand up to injustices right here in our own homes? Because Standing Rock is one pipeline project, you know, and we hear about all of these different fossil fuel industry projects happening everywhere, and I think it falls on the responsibility of each individual who has had the, you know, the education around the violence that these industries are creating. It becomes our responsibility to be actively vocal every day about how we can stop those projects from happening.
Yeah, that's such an important reminder that it has to be active.
Yeah.
Well, I really am so grateful for your time and your insight. Thank you for joining us. In closing, I just want to mention a call to action that the Lakota People's Law Project has, asking people to send emails to the Department of Treasury and the Bureau of Indian Affairs around a few different concerns. I think Peter is going to, or may have already posted a link to that call to action. So it would be great if folks can check that out. Madonna Thunder Hawk and Chase Iron Eyes and Tokata Iron Eyes and Daniel Sheehan, thank you so much for joining us.